Sunset Journey by Audrey Sinclair. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Arizona territory as Clara Matthews guided her horse along the dusty trail toward Silver Creek. The year was 1885, and the West was slowly yielding to civilization, though plenty of wild country remained. Her dark hair was neatly pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and her riding skirt showed the wear of someone who spent more time in the saddle than in drawing rooms. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her rein in her mare. These days, chance encounters on remote trails could mean anything from traveling salesmen to bandits. Clara's hand moved instinctively to the small revolver hidden in her saddlebag. A rider appeared around the bend, and Clara's tension eased slightly as she recognized the distinctive blue uniform of a U.S. Marshal. The man pulled up his horse a respectful distance away and touched the brim of his hat. "Afternoon, ma'am. Bit dangerous for a lady to be riding alone in these parts." "I appreciate your concern, Marshal, but I know these trails well enough," Clara replied, noting his strong jawline and the intelligent warmth in his brown eyes. "Marshal David Harrison," he introduced himself. "I'm heading to Silver Creek to investigate some cattle rustling." "Clara Matthews. I manage the Double M Ranch just outside town." She couldn't help but notice how his eyebrows rose slightly at this information. "The Double M? That's one of the largest spreads in the territory. You run it yourself?" "Since my father passed last spring," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. She'd grown used to men questioning her capability to manage such a large operation. But instead of skepticism, she saw respect in the Marshal's eyes. "I've heard good things about the Double M. Your beef contract with the Army keeps a lot of soldiers well fed." They fell into step together, their horses walking side by side along the trail. Clara found herself studying the Marshal from the corner of her eye. He sat his horse well, and though he wore his gun with the ease of long practice, he didn't have the dangerous edge she'd seen in so many lawmen who'd been in the territory too long. "What brings you out this far from the ranch, Miss Matthews?" "Banking business in town. Someone has to keep the books balanced?" She smiled. "Though I admit, I prefer working with the cattle to working with numbers." "A woman comfortable with both ledgers and horses. That's a rare combination out here." "My father believed in preparing me for everything," she said. "Though I doubt he ever imagined I'd be running the ranch alone at 26. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," David replied softly. Something in his tone made Clara glance at him sharply. "You sound like you're speaking from experience, Marshal?" He nodded. "I was a lawyer back east. Had a nice practice in Boston. Then the war came," he trailed off, lost in memory for a moment. "Afterward, I couldn't go back to arguing property disputes in stuffy courtrooms. Needed open sky above me." Clara understood completely. The vastness of the territory had a way of putting things in perspective, of healing wounds both visible and hidden. Their conversation flowed easily as they rode, touching on everything from cattle prices to favorite books. Clara was surprised to find a man who could quote Shakespeare while tracking outlaws, and David seemed equally impressed by her knowledge of both ranch management and classical literature. As they approached Silver Creek, the Marshal grew serious. "Miss Matthews, I should warn you, these rustlers I'm tracking, they're not just taking cattle, they're using the theft to cover up money laundering through legitimate businesses. You might want to check your books carefully." Clara reined in her horse. "You think someone at the Double M might be involved?" "I think someone might be using your operation without your knowledge. Would you allow me to look over your records?" She hesitated only a moment. "Come by tomorrow morning. I'll have everything ready." What began as a business meeting the next day turned into a week of careful investigation. David proved to be as skilled with numbers as he was with a gun, and Clara found herself impressed by his methodical approach. Together they uncovered a complex scheme involving her former foreman and several prominent citizens of Silver Creek. But they also discovered something else, a growing attraction that neither had expected. Over late nights studying ledgers and early mornings riding the range, they found themselves sharing hopes, fears, and dreams that they'd never voiced to anyone else. "You're not what I expected, Clara Matthews," David said one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Oh, and what did you expect from a ranch woman in the Arizona territory? Someone hardened by the land, perhaps. Instead, I found someone who can recite Wordsworth while mending fences and handles both cowboys and cattle buyers with equal grace." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "And you, Marshal Harrison, are not the typical lawman. How many others would recognize a misquoted line from The Tempest?" He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I suppose we're both breaking expectations. The investigation came to a head faster than either of them anticipated. The rustlers, desperate and cornered, attempted to burn down the Double M's main barn as a distraction while they made their escape. What they hadn't counted on was the combined determination of a skilled marshal and a rancher protecting her legacy. Clara proved her mettle that night, helping organize the bucket line that saved the barn while David and his deputies rounded up the gang. When the dust settled, she found him waiting by the corral, his face smudged with soot but his eyes bright with admiration. "I've been offered a permanent position as federal marshal for the Arizona Territory," he said without preamble. "They want me to set up an office in Tucson." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "That's quite an opportunity." "It is." He took a step closer. "But I find myself reluctant to accept unless I know something first." "And what's that, Marshal Harrison?" "Whether the owner of the Double M might be interested in regular visits from a former Boston lawyer turned lawman who can't seem to get her out of his mind." Clara pretended to consider this carefully. "Well, the Double M could certainly use some legal expertise now and then, and I suppose having a marshal nearby might discourage future rustlers." "Those are very practical considerations," he said, moving closer still. "I'm a practical woman, David." She tilted her face up to his. "But sometimes practicality isn't everything." Their first kiss tasted of smoke and promise, of endings and beginnings all wrapped together under the vast Arizona sky. The years that followed proved that love could flourish in the most unexpected places. David kept his office in Tucson but spent more time at the Double M than away from it. Clara continued to run the ranch with the same skill and determination that had first caught his attention, while he brought law and order to their corner of the territory. Together they built something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, founded on respect and grown into love. The Double M prospered, becoming not just a cattle ranch but a symbol of how the West was changing, becoming a place where strength and tenderness could coexist, where a woman could run a ranch and a lawman could quote poetry. On their wedding day, David presented Clara with a unique gift, a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare's sonnets that had survived his war years, his journey west, and finally found its home on a ranch in the Arizona Territory. Inside, he'd inscribed a single line, "Journeys end in lovers' meeting." Clara often thought how fitting those words were. Two people from different worlds, each carrying their own stories of loss and hope, finding each other on a dusty trail in the Arizona Territory. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was better than anything they could have planned. The end.